Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in my mind.
I almost wish that I had finished our next guest's book before you and I did our gaming, because I think it would have
Yeah.
made our gaming experience more interesting for us and maybe actually potentially listenable by our 5 listeners.
Well, now,
So,
what book are you referring to?
yes. So since I don't want to skip too far ahead, Keith Ammann, who we have had on here before,
Yes.
is joining us to talk about how to defend your lair.
The
It is a
fourth
book
one.
that comes out, the
Yeah.
fourth one. It comes out tomorrow, the
Yes.
29th of November.
Mm-hmm.
We were very lucky. We
Yeah.
talked with his publicist, Cassidy Sattler,
Yep. Yep.
and she provided us early release copies.
Yeah, thank you so
So-
much for that. So Brad and I had the true joy of reading Keith's latest book before the release date and before we actually spoke with Keith. And so you're going to hear that in a few minutes. We're going to keep this short because we want to get straight into it, because this fourth book in the Monsters Know What They're Doing series, I guess now, is, I mean, it's really rather fascinating, and you'll hear this in the interview, that this one really transcends just playing D&D. But so you were saying that, so go back to that, Brad.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that you'll hear when we talk to him. I found it fascinating that he's really writing this to go even beyond 5e.
Way beyond,
Way beyond 5e, and that's what really. And when we were reading it, we even talked about this in the context of using this in the realm of, for example, Star Wars.
Oh man, yes.
So we again very lucky that we were able to get an early release copy from Saga Press, who is publishing this.
Yeah.
And we've had a good fortune of having Keith on before, and very lucky to be able to talk to him before the book releases. So,
yeah, we really appreciate the fact that Keith spent time with us again. I mean, let's face it. These are just good people, like so many people with whom we talk because of this podcast. We're still a small podcast. We're trying to gain traction, but you know what? What did Keith say? I think we were the 5th podcast interview he'd done pre-release, and he's been talking to some big ones. Just the fact that he was willing to spend time, and we won't get into it, but the post-interview discussion, as is often the case, was even more interesting than the interview discussion, right?
We talk about
willing
this a
to
lot.
say off the record.
Yeah. The interview itself is fascinating and phenomenal. And traditionally we talk a little bit before, but we tend to talk a little bit more afterwards as we wrap up. And
just the whole thing.
He's
a tome of knowledge.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say encyclopedia, but tome is tome is the best way to put it.
He really is. Now, before we head over there, because don't you think we should just head over there, Brad?
I think there's no more needs to be said on my part.
Just 3 words to whet your appetite listening to this: detection, deterrence, very good, and response. Detection, deterrence, and response. I will never be able to think of role-playing campaigns, adventures, planning, even PC actions the same way again.
And think about anything we're talking to. Watch the news, and talking about, I hate to say it, war or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then in the context of all the research he's done.
I was just going to say, because this, he really dug deep. All right, without further ado then, we are thrilled to bring you our second and very current interview with author and all-around good guy Keith Ammann on his latest book, How to Defend Your Lair, published for availability for purchase tomorrow as this episode drops. Keith Ammann has been a Dungeons & Dragons player and DM for more than 30 years. He has been writing his 5th edition D&D focus blog, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, since 2016. He lives in Chicago. All right, well, Keith, thank you so much for joining us again to geek out about yet another one of your books.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I was looking right before Brad and I jumped on to record with you. I had this thought, it doesn't feel like a long time since your first ones came out. And I checked, and so The Monsters Know What You're Doing, right? More Monsters Know What You're Doing. My personal favorite, Live to Tell the Tale, just because as a player, that was just the downright most helpful. And now How to Defend Your Lair, that's all between 2019 and 2022?
Yeah.
That's intense.
4 books in 3 years. I mean, I don't think about that very often, but yeah, I guess that is a pretty brisk pace.
Well, I mean, given that 2 of them are tomes, I mean, it's not like they're plot based. There's so much research that had to go into those.
But one thing you had to understand. But one thing you have to understand about that is that I began The Monsters Know What They're Doing, the blog, in 2016. And so both that and More Monsters Know What They're Doing were essentially compiling material I had written already. And Live to Tell the Tale, I mean, there was revision involved and there was editing involved, but the meat of the writing had already been done. Live to Tell the Tale was an expansion and revision of an ebook that I had already written and self-published.
Okay.
And just, really enlarged and polished up for the trade market. How to Defend Your Lair is the first one that I have researched and written truly from scratch.
Neat.
And it kicked my butt. It's the reason why the blog went on an unintentional 13-month hiatus, because I was just completely tied up in the writing of this book. I apologized sincerely to all my readers for that 13 months of dead air.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one took a lot out of me. But people seem very happy with the results, so I'm happy.
I mean, it's certainly, I'm a little biased, but I think it's a fair trade-off. I mean, reading, so the good people at Saga Press, your publisher, they were kind enough to send us advance copies to read and review, and oh my God, I mean, the amount of detail, historical detail, like actual history. I would read it, and I'm not sure, people will see this as they read it, but I would often feel like, oh, so this is what it must have been like to be in the Middle Ages. Like, literally, like, there's so much detail. I mean, it makes sense. I'm kind of glad to hear it was consuming, because I would read it and I would think, how could you effortlessly do something like this? It is so no, really.
Oh, and the answer is no, I could not effortlessly do something like that.
Yeah, man, it's because it is absolutely fascinating. I enjoyed reading it almost more as an historical document than a D&D related document. It was really pushing multiple buttons for me.
Well, one of the things about How to Defend Your Lair is I tried to get away from what I did with the first 3 books, which was to be exclusively focused on 5th edition D&D. This time, 5th edition D&D is the backbone of it. All of the examples I give are 5e, use the 5e system. A couple of chapters are 5e specific. But the principles that I'm introducing are broadly applicable. If you're playing any kind of system in which you're trying to convincingly portray a world in which, cause and effect exist, then you can use a lot of what's in here.
Yeah. And not just in fantasy. I mean, this is
I think it would be very good for cyberpunk, for sci-fi,
big time.
For historical. even superhero if you wanted to.
Oh,
There's a lot there's a lot of different genres that you can use these same ideas in.
So why Keith this topic? Was this a perceived need? Was this an itch to scratch?
It was partly an itch to scratch. I had a few ideas percolating around in my head, and one of them was to take a kind of throwaway article from the blog called Thoughts on Building Encounters. It was from 2017. And I had just been kind of stream of consciousness talking about defensible space and you know, what kinds of monsters go with what other kinds of monsters. And I thought this is probably something I could expand on a lot. And at one point, I just kind of threw open a poll on Twitter and said, what are people most interested in seeing next? And How to Defend Your Lair was a solid leader on that. And so so I went with it. You know, I answered the call and went with that. And it's been a terrific learning experience for me as I have done this, you know, deep dive into all of the different questions that I would want to have answered if I were designing a well-defended lair.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, that's interesting. It's an intense read in the sense of just the sheer amount of information you pack into so few pages, especially I'm thinking like that first, it's not quite the first half, but that first half where it's truly the guidance. It's a ton. It's interesting you said that about the different genres, because, and this is my bias, but reading through it, I know I kept thinking, okay, this is perfect for Star Wars. I mean, I really seriously, right? Especially the old D6 from West End. I mean, it's like, this is perfect. Like, because like you said, the notion of a layer, and I think you set it up really well, because you do say, look, this can be agnostic essentially, right? You can use this in any avenue, if you will. You just, the principles are the same.
Right.
Yeah. I even with me looking at and kind of goofing around with the new One Ring series, I could see how it would apply just as well, because there's like even solo. I by reading that, I could actually see myself being kind of a world building junkie.
Wouldn't that be a great thought experiment? How does Elrond defend Rivendell? That would be a fantastic thought experiment, like to think about all of the different ways that he could do that.
Well, I mean, my thinking is, if Sauron had your book, Frodo and Sam would never have had a chance, because it would have been like, well, damn it, I screwed up on this chapter, right? I mean, he clearly didn't follow your guidance. No.
Should have had a few more orcs watching the back stairs.
So actually, I will say,
can't leave it all to a big spider.
No, that's right. But you do get into that level of detail. I mean, that's what really, one of the things that really stood out to me of, you know, you read through this and it's like, oh, I never thought of that. I never thought of that. And I know you said, you know, you were asking yourself, okay, what would you really need to know? What would you want to know? But then it's like all of these second thoughts of, and don't forget, you've got X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I like reading the other books. I thoroughly enjoyed that, but like I could walk away from them and think, okay, you know, pause for the evening, and it's like, yeah, that was interesting. That gets me going. This one, I would find I had to process for a while. Like I'd read it, and I just have to get a little bit of time so I could see all of these things you were explaining. Like, how does this actually work in practice? Because again, I kept thinking to myself, this wouldn't even have to be gaming oriented. It just makes so much sense. What kind of research did this entail for you? I mean, you said it took a lot out of you. Why? Like what was the path?
Well, partly one of the reasons it took a lot out of me is because some of the material was extremely difficult to find. It was extremely difficult, for instance, to find material on Arctic warfare. That was crazy hard to find. And what was extremely frustrating is that I would, you know, do some online research and I'd find, oh, this guy knows all about this stuff. He is absolutely the person I should talk to. And then I would try to reach out to him and get nothing.
Yeah.
Never got back to me. And so I'm like trying to find some, second best, and man, it was just so difficult. And I kept running into that because this was a pandemic book. I was writing this shut up in my home under quarantine,
right?
And using whatever resources I could get from the Chicago Public Library system, which turned out to be quite a bit, and the University of Illinois at Chicago Library, which was not much. So, and just the, ordering things into my local branch library, rush in, grab them, rush out, and, peruse it all at home. So basically, if the Chicago Public Library didn't have it, and if I couldn't find it online, I was out of luck. So, but I got some amazing stuff. There was a whole textbook from the American Institute of Architects on building security. I just went ahead and bought a couple of U.S. Army manuals on offense and defense. And some incidental reading that I was doing at the time snuck in there too. Things that I was just reading for my own personal reasons, and it turned out there was some little nugget in the book, and I thought, okay, this applies to what I'm writing. It should go in. And nice. Just by pure happenstance, I got some valuable knowledge from that I went ahead and put into the book. Read up a lot about castles, despite the fact that a castle and a lair are very much two different things. Castles are very public. They are at least nominally run for the benefit of an entire region. There's a lot of porosity between a castle and the community around it. A castle is not built to defend against its immediate surroundings. It's built to defend its immediate surroundings. Whereas a lair is very personal, very private, potentially very secretive. You don't want to draw attention to a lair. A castle is conspicuous consumption. But that being said, if you are looking at a fantasy setting that is essentially rooted in late medieval, early Renaissance technology, castles represented the state of the art of defensive architecture in that period of time. And so, all this architecture that we associate with castles, and, we don't even really think about what it was for, but we can all picture it perfectly. All of it was specifically designed to solve particular problems regarding defense. And so every single one of those architectural features had a specific function. And when you think about those functions, then you can begin to say, well, okay, given some of the expanded capabilities in this fantasy world, what are some other ways to solve this same problem? Or what are ways in which I can enhance this solution?
I will say what you just said, the whole section on the design, architecture, logic of castles, that was my favorite. I thought that was, I've only been to a few. We're going to see another one this winter break. And, little bits I knew, but it was kind of like this little master class in castle design, which I'm not kidding, which I really like. I remember back in college, one of my favorite courses was biblical archaeology. Right. And I thought maybe I would minor in archaeology, never got there. But in that class, we spent some time talking about, the design of of walls. It's no castles, but defensive structures. Thousands of years ago, and I loved it. And then reading your book, it was interesting because you do refer to some of that, but it was fascinating to me how the same principles ostensibly carried over for 2,000, 3,000 years, right? The same design, the same design logic of, okay, we want to pin them, we want to redirect them, we want to keep them in or out. I just, the specificity with which you explained all that, I really found engaging. I mean, fun to read it too for the sake of playing, but I really, the whole castle lair discussion. But then you go on and like, it's kind of like, well, this would be a natural point to stop. And then you go on and like you mentioned, Arctic defense, you then go through all of these types of terrains, one at a time, and identify how they have unique requirements.
Right. And, some of those requirements are actually not really that steep. Grassland lairs, hill lairs. This is, you build a lair in one of these areas and it's basically going to look like a castle because that's the kind of terrain castles were built to defend. But then once you get into other sorts of lairs, they start to look very different. And what you said about the basic forms holding true from the beginning of time, one of the first principles I discuss in the book is one that I got from Security Planning and Design, the AIA book, which is that basically you have three components in every kind of defensive plan. You need detection, deterrence, and response, which incidentally is what those three little goblin kids on the cover represent if you look at them.
I didn't pick that up.
I got it right here. That's what
yeah. So and if you just look at your very most basic primitive castle, the Motte and Bailey, you've got your detection, deterrence, and response right there. You've got detection in the form of the tower keep. You've got deterrence in the form of the wall and the moat, and you've got response in the form of the garrison.
Right.
And no matter how much castles evolve, you still always have those exact same three things. The towers move from the keep to the wall. The walls get higher and thicker, and the gates get more complex. Sometimes their geometry gets more interesting. The response moves from lots of dudes with pointy things to lots of dudes with things that go bang, but it's still all detection, deterrence, and response.
Yeah. Even when you get from bang to pew pew, I mean, the principles presumably are truly timeless, right?
Yeah. I mean, you always need those three things.
Yeah.
And you always need them for the same reasons.
Right.
The only thing that differs is the geography and the technology.
Okay,
and whether or not you have magic, which is really just another kind of technology.
Yeah, that's a neat way to conceptualize that. So okay, I've got it. It's kind of a Brad question. So Brad, I'm going to take this. I know the kind of questions you want to ask, but I got to ask this one. So Keith, having written this, having done all this research, do you use any of it in play for yourself? Have you played recently?
I have played, but I've mostly played out of published material.
Yeah.
I have not had the opportunity to do a lot of homebrew. I had begun a homebrew campaign, and then one of my players had to go on hiatus because she had to take care of childcare while her partner was doing some advanced studies. So I basically have a main group that is 6 players, including this player. And when this player is not available, the other 5 for a while did Curse of Strahd. And now we're using that same group of characters in Monty Cook's Darkest House. So it's still published stuff.
Yeah.
But would I use it? Oh, heck yeah, I would. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I at Gamehole Con last month, I ran several of these lairs as one shots, as a demo for the book.
Oh, cool.
And had a lot of fun doing that.
I'll bet. I assume it was pretty well received.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people liked it. Okay, so turning this a bit on its head, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'm curious about the details. A player who's read this, right? Someone who's not particularly interested in GM, how could they use this?
Seeing as use it to well, there are two things. They could use it to design their own stronghold. Number one, and number two, they could use it as basically a way to simulate breaking and entering expertise. You know, if you have someone who's like playing a rogue, a thief or an inquisitive, and they are your expert on breaking and entering, and they can be the one who will say, you know, just like the ranger is the one who knows all about nature, right? You know, everything that happens in the woods, you ask the ranger first, or maybe you ask the barbarian. Anything to do with magic, you ask the wizard. Anything to do with how to break into this fortified compound, you ask the rogue, and the rogue will tell you, okay, these are all the things we can expect to encounter along the way. These are the things we have to figure out how we're going to get around.
Man. For your creative process with this, obviously you said this is a very different type of it's a different type of book than what you've been writing previously. Was the creative process different? And I know we talked about research and everything like that, but when you really kind of sat down and was doing the writing, did it feel different to you? Did it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was very different. It was more akin to the kind of writing I used to do, which was journalism and then academic writing. The thing about The Monsters Know and More Monsters is that's just me sitting down and analyzing something that's right there in front of me from a book I own. You know, it's analyzing a stat block and figuring out the implications of the stat block. And I don't have to do research for that. Live to tell the tale. It's the same thing. It's going through the player's handbook and supplementary books like Xanathar's and saying, okay, what are the implications of this? How does this work in practice? It's analytical. But for this, I had to go out and find answers to questions I didn't already know the answers to, and it required a lot more legwork, you know, some actual interviewing, and discovery, and you know,
and all
and
that.
It was a lot less linear. Like I tend to analyze a stat block from top to bottom. Every once in a while, I'll deviate and like lock in on something and take note of that first, and then construct the rest of my analysis around that one focal point. But for this, it was a lot of jumping around, a lot of carving and polishing, and you know, a lot of, well, I'm stuck on this part right now because I can't find the material that I know I need. So I'm just going to stop and work on something else for a while. The other thing is those other books are all me. In this one, I have to give a lot of credit to the cartographers I worked with, because for the design of the lairs, what I did is I conceptually figured out what these lairs were going to need to include, and wrote up specs. And every once in a while, you know, I would like maybe scribble out a little rough sketch, an overall like very loose plan. And then I would give that to one of the cartographers and say, give me this. And so a lot of those lairs, come from them. You know, from the way they interpreted my explanation of what the layers needed, and then I would review it and say, okay, we need to change this here, we need to beef this up here, you know, and then we'd go through a couple of iterations of that. It generally didn't take more than 3 or 4 iterations before we had a really good final product. Dungeon Baker, Chloe Bolland, Fernando Salvatierra, and Reclusive Cartographer, they contributed a lot to this book and deserve a lot of the credit. And I give links to their work in the back of the book. If anyone out there is working on a project and needs some good map makers, hit them up.
And the cartography really is lovely. I mean, it's first rate. So you had assistance. That's the wrong word for it, but you had assistance. You know, you had the magic of this cartography offered to you.
It's assistance, yeah. I mean, it's collaboration.
Well, I don't want to minimize it, right? I mean, just how much they did here. But in terms of the research, you didn't have an assistant. This was all you.
Yeah.
A lot of legwork.
I mean, so you've obviously, it's coming out here very shortly. Do you have without obviously, I'm not looking for spoilers, but
no.
Do you have other things on your desk that you're thinking about going forward in terms of additional books or material?
I am trying very hard right now to figure out what I'm going to do next. I do have a project I'm working on for the DMs Guild, but I would consider it a side project. It's just a bunch of subclasses basically that I'm working on. You know, I recently on the DMs Guild I published the Druid Circle of the Cryptid subclass, which I was pretty proud of, and a lot of people liked that. And I've come up with a bunch of I have some other subclass ideas, or I should say I had some other subclass ideas, but they were too short to publish on their own. Like, you know, the ones I've done before, Oath of Deliverance, Paladin, Circle of the Cryptid, Druid, they're pretty meaty. But like a Bard subclass or a Rogue subclass, those don't really fill up a page. So, you know, it's hard to say you should pay me $1.99 for this. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just come up with as many of these as I can, bundle them together in a nice big package, and put them out that way. So I'm working on that, but beyond that, I'm not sure. I'm looking for direction.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and I wonder,
and it's tough because, you know, with the changes that are likely coming to D&D in 2024, trade publishing is slow, and I got blindsided by Monsters of the Multiverse coming out. Like, I literally found out that Monsters of the Multiverse was coming out the week after I had submitted my 3rd proof of more monsters. At that point, there was nothing I could do to change it. So, you know, after the fact, I went on the blog and I said, okay, if you're using Monsters of the Multiverse, these are the things that change.
Wow.
Which fortunately was not a huge portion of the book. Like, there were a lot of things that I suggested that were no longer possible. But typically the changes to the tactics tended to just be slightly subtractive. There were only, I don't know, maybe only a 1/6 of the tactics actually really had to change significantly, if that. but I've published those changes at themonstersknow.com.
Yeah,
so
nice.
anyone who got more monsters and is also using the stat blocks from Monsters of the Multiverse, go to the blog.
Yeah, nice.
They're all there under the multiverse tag, and that's out there for free.
We'll make sure we obviously have the blog,
absolutely.
the blog in our show notes too. So
yeah. But the thing is, like, could I write a third one of those at this point? Not with any confidence that it wouldn't be obsolete by the time it came out. So I have to just kind of wait and watch.
Yeah.
With respect to that. But also, I want to branch out a little bit, try some other things, work with some other people. I mean, work with other people, not just not just a few freelance cartographers who I'm paying for their contributions, but like, actual co-authors and co-developers. Stuff that's truly collaborative from start to finish would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot here, so feel free to ignore this, but would you ever consider, I mean, because you kind of did already, would you ever consider moving beyond D&D as a focus, or would you be happy staying there?
Well, if you mean moving on from D&D to entirely separate topics, maybe. If you mean moving from D&D to other role-playing games, the audience is probably not there to satisfy the needs and desires of a trade publisher.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not the first. In fact, I think you said something along those lines to us the first time we chatted with you. But you're certainly not the only author with whom we spoke who said, "Look, there's a reality of the marketplace. I mean, there's a bear in the room, and the bear is a lot of fun, but the market for D&D material is so big compared to anyone else out there."
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But you'd perhaps consider doing things beyond the realm of RPG.
Yeah. I mean,
cool.
I am large. I contain multitudes. As anyone who has read my books can probably figure out, my interests are extremely wide ranging. Yeah. I have a very wide and weird constellation of skills and interests, and this is just one way I happened to manage to bring them all together. There might actually be even another one or a third, who knows?
That'd be pretty cool.
There's more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio.
That's right. Yeah, I'm sorry, Brad, go ahead.
No, I was just going to go ahead, and then I have a question that's kind of more of a wrap up type of question. So.
Well, yeah, okay. So before we get there,
not that we have to wrap up now. It was just it's going to branch off a little bit.
Yeah, I'm curious. It kind of goes back to Brad's earlier question in terms of your writing process, your creative process. So you look at your entire corpus of writing, and especially these now 4 books, and these 4 books with a large trade publisher. And I'm curious, just peeling back that fourth wall, if you will, has your writing, has your process, has your workflow changed over these several books? Are there things that you find yourself doing differently to write better or more enjoy it, or I don't know, maybe the opposite?
Not so much. I mean, the differences that I described before, the difference between, what's essentially pure Gedanken experiment versus actual research writing. But really not that much, because I have been a language professional in some capacity or another since 1993. The real development of my writing took place during those first 10 years.
Sure.
You know, it was those years of working as a copy editor and as a writer of news and feature and opinion articles, columns, including a column for a while about games and pastimes for an alternative news weekly. All of that is really where my writing style and my writing process and my voice come from. And so, and it's the voice that I brought to The Monsters Know when I first started writing The Monsters Know.
Right.
And I think that voice has been a really crucial element in my ability to grow and maintain a readership, because let's face it, some of the stuff I'm talking about is very dry and very abstract. And if I weren't able to, you know, bring a lively voice to it, nobody would want to read it. So, you know, the fact that people do want to read it, I attribute to my having this voice from the get-go, and sticking with it, and having some freedom as an outsider to be reverent when reverence is called for, and to be irreverent when irreverence is called for.
Absolutely.
You know, that freedom is precious to me, and I think gives my work the energy that it possesses. And without that, I don't know if it would have the exact same energy. I think it would still be good, but it wouldn't have the same energy.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So obviously, you know, you're doing what we were talking about before in terms of subclass work and all that. And you're kind of deciding what your path is now. A little bit of extra time, perhaps, on your that you probably haven't had before. We always tend to. I've been asking folks that join us, what's on your desk these days? What are you reading? That, you know, or what's interested you, or now that you aren't maybe writing as much, you know, like on my desk, I have this book. Yours. What do you have on your desk these days, or what's in your hand from a reading perspective?
You know, one of the things, it's funny because the same question came up in another interview I recently did, and I've been in this kind of rough patch with reading, where I've got a lot of books on my nightstand, and I'll get like a chapter or two into them and then feel like this isn't really what I feel like reading right now, and I'll put it down. And I've gone through 4 or 5 different books that way. The last real page turner that I read, just start to finish in like 3 days, was N.K. Jemison's The World We Make. And I have Aaron M. Evans's Empire of Exiles, that I just got, and I pre-ordered it. I got it on the day it came out, and I'm a page into it. I need to like, you know, dig in and dive into that one. It's getting great reviews. I mean, I have no doubt that once I, like, you know, get my traction on it, I'll be hooked. But yeah, aside from those two, man, it's just been really, really hard for me to get in the zone with the things I've been reading. I have recently read and just absolutely loved the Dandelion Dynasty saga by Ken Liu. That I love that series so much that when Saga said, we've got some extra pages in the back of More Monsters. What do you want to do with these pages? You know, what do you want to fill them with? I said, put in an ad for Ken Liu.
Wow, nice.
Because I love those books so much. Really liked the final revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton. Just absolute home run of a book. Departure from the other kinds of titles that I've mentioned. It's just contemporary fiction, but so incredibly good.
Wow.
As far as nonfiction goes, Prisoners of Geography. And I forget the name of the author of that book, but it's subtitled 10 Maps That Explain the World. And it's all about, yes, Tim Marshall. It's all about how the physical geography of countries and continents dictates so much about the way they behave geopolitically. And I read this last year, and the one chapter in it, there's a chapter in it about Russia. And the thesis of it is basically, for various reasons, sooner or later, Russia is going to invade Ukraine. And
interesting.
It's a really exceptional book.
Yeah, I'm looking it up. I'm doing a Brad and looking it up.
Yeah,
right
that's why you see me kind of looking to the side.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not watching. I'm kind of, as you're firing off. I know.
Fascinating.
I think we talked about Ken Liu before. He's been on my radar, but Prisoners of Geography. That actually is. See, that's why I kind of asked the question, because I always get these interesting.
I'm looking at the table of contents right now, and I guess I know what I'm going to be ordering soon. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Keith, seriously, thanks so much again for taking the time. I mean, we know you are very popular these days, and man, are these books successful. I just personally, I love having the privilege of knowing you this little bit, and then I can go to like any of the Barnes and Nobles or, larger bookstores around, and I always look. And for the past few years, your books have always been there. One or two, or sometimes all three, or hopefully now all four. And that's just the coolest thing. I'm glad that those books are getting around. They clearly must be, because people are buying them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us again. We both thoroughly enjoyed the book. It comes out on
the 29th. The day after this drops. Congratulations ahead of time on book number 4.
Thank you very much.
May you find some clarity and peace of mind as you move toward 5, whatever that may be. We will be reading it.
Again, even after re-listening to it myself, you can take any of Keith's books and apply and use that material in theory in any game you want to play. You can
absolutely
change stat blocks and so on. But this book, and Keith even talks about it.
Yeah, he does.
You can this book has a lot of good 5e material, but it also is potentially game agnostic as well. You can we've talked about using this in the context of Star Wars or One Ring or whatever the case may be.
I mean, I keep circling back to Andor, because the series, season 1 of the series just finished, right? Star Wars Andor, and I really, really enjoyed it. You still have to watch it, and it's so apropos to what Keith wrote with DDR, as you call it, right? Detection, deterrence, response. I mean, looking at the Empire's approach to taking the galaxy through the analysis Keith wrote in How to Defend Your Lair, it's like, and even some of the things like the character says to, the Cassian Andor, to paraphrase, do you think they actually care what we're talking about? We don't even, rate to them. They don't have to pay attention, and so they don't. And I'm paraphrasing, and I'm purposely using Star Wars because it's so far afield from D&D. But like you said, Keith wrote this as a fundamentally different kind of book. And so I not to put the cart before the horse, since the book actually comes out tomorrow, but I'm really looking forward to book 5 because I'm really curious. I mean, truly curious. What is he going to do next that might be even farther away from the more tried and true tropes that we're all used to?
And I think, like I said, we never ask for spoilers or anything like that. But
No.
Outside of recording, that's one of the first things we asked was what's next on the docket, and it's the gears are already churning with him. So we're very hopeful that and excited about what he's going to be providing in the future.
Although we don't expect him to come out with it anytime soon. I think we talked about this in the interview. He's had these 4 books in like 5 years or so. I mean, something ridiculous. And I know he was very modest about it, but Keith, if you're listening, and we hope you are, thank you again, and no hurry. No hurry. If it takes a few years for the next one, it'll be completely worth the wait. As I said when we were chatting off air, as an academic, I think this book is something to be proud of academically. This isn't just a book about role playing. This is a book of scholarship. And so I truly enjoyed reading it. And I really respect this one. As much as I enjoyed the other ones, I really respect what he did with this one. This is a different level. And
again, thanks to Keith. Thanks to
time.
Cassidy as publicist, and thanks to Saga Press for getting us early copies, so we had a great privilege in being able to get this and read this even before we talked with Keith.
So with that, why don't we wander over to the GM corner?
And what's funny is we got so what do you
No, I don't know.
You just don't know where I'm going.
Brad's got the grin on his face. It's like, okay, hold over the pause button. No.
Yeah. Get ready for the explicit button.
That's right.
No, actually nothing to do with that. I cannot believe I didn't bring this up at the intro, but we're so into the book, into the interview. You were down here visiting last weekend.
Yes.
And you hadn't been down here in a year. So we haven't seen each other, even though we see each other on camera as we record this.
Yes.
Multiple times a week.
Yeah.
And we talk almost daily.
Yeah.
We were all together, you and I and 2 of our friends together for the first time in a year, and got to socialize and enjoy and head out.
Well, we should call out Brad, I'm looking at you, Brian and Eric for a one-off, because they both download the podcast, and at least one of them listens to it.
Yes. Yeah, and we don't have to pay them any sort of honorarium to download it in any way, shape.
Oh, that's not what they told me. Okay, keep going.
Well, I don't know if you're paying them. I'm not.
I'm not anymore.
Yeah, but yeah, we got to, and we did spend some time talking about the podcast, but it was so good to have us all together.
It was.
I'll be perfectly honest. We didn't really talk a whole lot about role playing or anything like that. We got busy.
In all fairness, when I came into town, the first thing you and I did was go to the gaming store.
Yeah,
but
true.
after that, we didn't. We didn't.
I mean, literally, you got here after a 4.5, 5 hour drive.
Yeah.
And I think you were in the house about 15, 20 minutes, and we were off in my car down to the gaming store. Yeah.
Which, is funny because, as you know, and as we've talked about on the podcast numerous times, so as this episode drops, we here in the States just finished a 4-day extended holiday weekend. That was lovely. And I have made it kind of this tradition every Thanksgiving weekend, like that Friday or whatever, you know where I'm going, to stop at a friendly local gaming store, because that's what I did with one of my wife's brothers and one of her cousins back in 2016, when I thought to heck with this. I'm going back in. Well, no, that you got me into Pathfinder.
But didn't you look at it because your brother-in-law plays it, doesn't he? Or did?
We actually went. He did or he does. We actually went to the Fantasy Flight Games store because that's just up, right? That's just that's just north of me, up in Roseville, or is it Falcon Heights? Whatever, Roseville, and I went and I picked up the Edge of the Empire source book, right? A core rulebook, excuse me. Anyways, and so since then I've made it a point, and this, well, I guess we're in the GM corner now. So this is my thing. This year I didn't, for the first time in several years. We've got a brand new gaming store literally in my neighborhood called Level Up. I think it's their third store in the city. It's a nice store, friendly people, and I want to support them. But I thought, you know what? I don't need to go shopping on Black Friday this year. And I know what I'm going to say is just madness. But I don't really need any RPG books right now. I know. God. I mean, you can almost feel Brad's credit card cringing. And I just
trust me, it did.
I don't need anything. I'm still waiting for the hard copy, as are you, of the Star Trek Adventures Starfleet Utopia Planitia source book, and so I'm waiting for that. Hopefully next month. But that said, I'll just finish with this and hit it over to you, my friend. I texted you this, I think, just the other night. Did you ever play Paranoia as a kid?
No, and I forgot to respond to you, but I saw that it was a Kickstarter.
So I have the Paranoia source book, a core rule book. I believe it's the second edition, from when we were preteens. I actually have a character sheet that I created, and it looks like I was playing with our friend Scott, but I don't think we ever actually played. Anyways, I think it's a hilarious dystopian concept. And yeah, when I texted you the other day, as this episode drops, this past extended holiday weekend, I came across the Kickstarter for Paranoia Perfect Edition, and it looks really funny. And it got me to the point of, I started thinking, well, I'm kind of tempted to, because the Kickstarter just closed. There were like literally 12 hours left when I found it, but and nothing's going to be available hard copy until like March at the earliest, and I don't want to wait. I'm still waiting on a book now. Talking to you, Jim. And
it wouldn't be an episode if we didn't call poor Jim out at least once.
No, well, yeah, he's a good friend of the podcast and a good all-around guy. But I'm kind of tempted now on going back and picking up the most recent, what is it, the Paranoia Red clearance. I'm just a little tempted, unless I can get my hands on Starforge. But anyways, I did not go to a gaming store this past weekend. I was very content to just work with what I have, and I as I told you before we were recording, I was putting my attention into other avocational pursuits. How about you? I know kind of the answer to this, but
you already know, because we kind of talked about
you have a lot on your GM desk right now.
Yeah, so day after Thanksgiving, obviously the sales hit hard. And so I actually picked up a couple things from our friends at Modifius. There were 3 PDF adventures for Dune: Desert Flower, and then Desert Fall Adventure, and Time Becomes a Narrow Door. Those were PDFs. Nice. They're under $5 for a PDF.
Oh man!
So even if I print them out, it's for me, with the cost of my toner and everything like that, total cost with buying it, it's going to probably be like $6 for each. Which, for adventures, I mean, no brainer. And then I did pick up on sale the Agents of Dune box set and the Game Master's Toolkit for Dune, which I hadn't gotten. So I've been working on building up my Dune collection. And the reason for that is after finishing through our 5e adventure and having interviews and such with 5e, I just wanted to take a little breather and take a change, because you and I have been talking about playing something differently, or playing a different genre, just to keep things fresh, because we play so often. Sarcasm intended.
And everyone heard how well that went.
Yeah, that really went well. I'm not going to be winning any DM awards.
Oh my god. Well,
but between Dune, and the One Ring, I've mentioned this before, I started digging in over the weekend on what they call the Strider mode, which is for the One Ring, rules for solo role playing with the One Ring RPG, which to me is absolutely fascinating. So, and this is through Drive Through RPGs where I picked it up, and I actually had it printed and wire bound. So on my desk right now are those two games. Those are my two games. And then I'm still thinking that we should try it for something different. I had picked up the Marvel Multiverse.
Yeah, we haven't. Yeah, we haven't talked much about that.
The play test, and it was developed by and led by Matt Forbeck, who we've had on the show.
Yep, absolutely.
Is a Wisconsinite, just about an hour's drive south of me, and it's a very small, thin book. I'm a Marvel nut. You can get it on Amazon for right now it's listed as $7.84.
These are the PDFs. No,
that's the actual printed playtest rule book for under $8. It's actually more expensive to buy the Kindle version than it is to buy the paperback.
Incredible. Now we should say, lest we get angry email, although no one emails us, that we're finishing the recording of this Sunday night of the weekend. So, but Cyber Monday, these sales are probably going to continue, aren't they? So
yeah, and there are a couple. I won't talk about them here because I'll talk about them at our next episode.
Yeah,
the damage will have been done to the pocketbook by then. But there's a couple other books that I want to get, and just as a teaser, you and I have talked about it, and we've messaged our friends at Green Ronin. I really want us. This is kind of a teaser, much like we did with Star Trek for months before we realized we would be better off actually playing the game. But I still want to use Green Ronin's Modern Age.
Yes.
And you and I have talked about the idea of playing that in relatively current time, current tech, nothing super sci-fi or high fantasy, but trying to take the Modern Age rules and make it a air quote real life game. And that's one of the topics that came up when we were at the game store.
You brought that up. That's true. You brought that up right away.
And as we go, the only game that piqued my interest there was, and I didn't know it existed, and I can't tell you who publishes it because it's just off the top of my head. There is a G.I. Joe role-playing game. And didn't pick up the book or anything, but it just fascinates me in a good way.
Well, I mean, he was a real American hero. So
he was, and that was the cartoon that was on for our generation. Still want to look into that more. I definitely can't afford it at this point, but
why is that?
Because of the purchases I have and will be making.
That's honest.
Over the holiday weekend sales that are all going on.
That's fair.
So starting with Modifius and moving to a couple other gaming companies, but I need to make sure that the checks cash before I actually talk about them. So
wait, do you hear that?
Yeah, that's my wife yelling. That's my wife yelling at me to get out of the house.
That's unrelated but fair. Yeah. All right. On that note, everybody, our thanks again to Keith for another fascinating interview. And thanks as always to all of you for listening. You know the deal. You know what? Before we wrap,
we have to talk about the next couple.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody. Hold on one more minute here. Not even. Brad and I have been teasing this for a while, but it's coming now. Now next week we have just an absolutely fascinating, fun interview. I probably geeked out in terms of the content matter of next week's episode.
What are you talking about? Yeah.
More, yep, I hope so. More
this is
than
where
just about any other.
this is the one I had the internet issues with. Right?
You had internet issues, so
Yeah.
so Brad was
which worked out
yeah.
because it allowed you, because you alone would have been more than enough.
I was all in. We'll say, all we'll say is that it has to do both tangentially and directly with something, and we're not going to make it obvious, but
you're really dancing around this.
We talk about this all the time on this podcast. So, but what we
our
really
wives,
want to just...
it's about having something to do with our wives.
Yes.
Okay.
Pew pew. What we want to just give everyone a heads up is that's next week. But then in the 2 weeks leading up to the holiday season, Brad and I are going to run a 2-part series on mental health at the table. And so we're going to diverge a little bit, go back to what we talked about like a year ago, because we think it's time, and we've been wanting to do this for months and months. So that's coming. We hope you will find those episodes to be of interest, perhaps even of benefit, perhaps even worth sharing with those who might not be at the table, but perhaps ought to be. And so more about that next week. As always, thanks so much, everyone. Be well, stay well. We'll see you next week.